Dun-dun-dun! Hi, welcome. This is Jess Pettitt. Today we are back with chapter 23, Export and Import Bank. So as maybe some of you are procrastinating a very large project and you are actually watching many of these videos. If you are watching the Export Import Bank video, I have two warnings. First off, riveting. I think riveting is the key word. This is not an area I know anything about. Probably don't even know. I don't even know enough to not care about it. But we made a commitment to do all of the chapters. And Thomas, dun, 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 is stupid enough to have asked, hey, are there any chapters where your volunteers have become overcommitted or flaked out? Do you need any help? Why, yes, Thomas, I do. Would you be interested in reading a chapter on export-import banks? No. But here's the setup of the chapter, and that my trick to get Thomas to say yes is that this chapter is made up of two essays written by two different people who did not talk to each other about their contradictory offerings that are also very extreme. So one is the export-import bank should be abolished. Solid commitment there. And the other one is the case for export-import bank, with not a lot of suggestions about what should be done to it, other than don't abolish it. This could be a very short video because Thomas nor I care. So we should care. We probably should care. So Thomas, thank you for being back. I'm sorry again that you said yes to doing this chapter. Is there anything hot or burning a hole that needs to be stated off the bat?
You know, I'll see if I can do that and make it interesting.
don't do too much heavy lifting here.
Okay. Yeah, it's about rest right now. So I would say that overall, why couldn't they just talk about the big private tech or military defense contractor companies instead of this like amorphous XM, you know? Oh, and by the way, XM, that's the abbreviation for the Export-Import Bank of the United States government. And so
EXIM, export
yes,
import.
EXIM. And so yeah, Jess is spot on with introducing what the chapter is about. But it's just two different arguments next to each other, and that's it. There's no argument as what Project 2025 should do about it. There's nothing that says, you know, the new administration should take this and do this. It's like a, yeah, it's like a high school or college debate brief where you're like affirmative, negative, that's it. Except that I will give high schoolers and college students credit in that there's actually a call to action in most of those briefs. So
yeah, I was going to say, as a high school debater, hold
right.
on.
Yes,
because not only is there a call to action, there is also a moment of charity where you at least acknowledge something about
oh my
the other
God.
party. You acknowledge that they are present. That's not happening here.
I will say that like our last video, I'll finish this introduction by saying that again, there is just such a lack of citations with a lot of the numbers that they bring into the conversation. And so I think
those were air quotes for people listening
right,
and not watching.
Air quotes. You know, I think it makes it even less, or sorry, it makes it even more uninteresting that you have to read through a chapter that talks about export-import banking without providing any citations for the numbers that they provide. And then they, you know, throw in some wild claims about how, for example, in the first section, and this, then we can transition, but in the first section, how it makes some wild claims that we're paying for everyone's standard of living in other countries because this bank exists. It's just so wild and bizarre and boring all at once that
could you imagine, like, this is my attempt at being charitable. Imagine working in a place, right, that has like internet and a phone and a copy machine, and maybe if you're lucky, you get your own garbage can, and you feel like the weight of the globe's standard of living is because of your 9 to 5 shift on a Tuesday.
Yeah, and because of this special bank that we're just paying for someone
Yeah.
else's living,
Wow.
it's the world.
Uh-huh. Okay. So if anyone's still here, you should probably be folding your
Uh,
laundry.
yeah,
Okay. So
seriously.
let's start at the beginning. What is the Export Import Bank? It seems like this is loan guarantees, working capital guarantees, direct loans, export credit insurance. Um, there's some language that I thought was a little interesting. So one is subsidy combat.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jess, for bringing that up because that was really weird.
Subsidy combat. Now, for the record, well, step one, I don't know what that means, and I don't know what that doesn't mean. So
Great.
here's what my
Great,
brain
Jess.
thought when we're talking about tariffs or taxes. The power dynamic involved in charging or not charging, or collecting or not collecting, increasing, decreasing, whatever. I think that's the power dynamic that's being labeled combat. We have to remember that there is a
Yeah.
theme running through all 922 pages, is that their bad guys are picking the winners and losers. And so they're demanding that their good guys get the power to pick winners and losers. So I think that's where the combat is coming from. I'm not exactly certain what a subsidy is, so I did some googly bits on that, and it seems like coupons, right, or like rebates. Like we're gonna help you out for doing this. That's the closest correlation to my level of regular peopleness. Um, there is also mentions quantum computing, which gets thrown around a lot, AI, the entire semiconductor industry. What?
All of it.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Then we get into what I am referring to people's personal gossip journal or diary entries, and then they're given an opportunity to publish them. Because,
Thank you. That's exactly what it reads.
huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it reads.
I after reading some of these, I just want to be like, who hurt you at the Export Import Bank? Like, get a therapist, have a muffin, take a nap. What's going on? So, for example, 2000. Remember, these are words in the scary mandate for leadership 2025 project by Heritage Foundation, right? 2014 to 2015, there were not enough human beings on the board of the Export Import Bank to meet quorum, so they didn't meet.
Yeah.
There's not a there is not a word in that sentence I don't understand outside of context, but when you string them together, it seems pretty easy to come up with an elimination or abolishment plan if it
Right.
didn't even meet quorum to meet for a year, and the standard of living around the globe seemed to work just fine.
Right.
Okay, I can't confirm or deny, because what? Um, here's another bit. Risk and sovereign guarantees are connected to job growth and GDP. And interest paid on loan default rates. That's more under subsidy combat, or like loan default rates. There's also that debt, the playing of debt that China is evidently trying to do. You know how much we consistently hate China through the whole thing, that
Right.
we're building roads and bridges and giving bits and pieces to countries that can't afford them, and then they're indebted because they can't pay the debts off. So then that's how China's amassing power around the globe. also known as asymmetrical warfare toolbox.
Oh yeah.
The asymmetrical warfare had me. The toolbox had the warfare toolbox has me, and the asymmetrical, I'm assuming, is related to the winners and losers.
Right. And I think it's just so disconnected because the author opens up by saying that, okay, this organization, and plenty of stock photos on the website, by the way, I checked before, and it's kind of corny, but anyway. Um, so the author opens up by saying, okay, this bank is pretty useless. They don't really employ people, they don't maintain that, they just sort of push around money and try to influence people across the globe. And then they go on to say, oh, but watch out because they're going to disenfranchise every single taxpayer out there because they invest so much into Boeing and all these other defense contractors. And then I'm thinking to myself, then why, why isn't there a chapter on the fact that Boeing and these private companies are taking away money from taxpayers, not this like import export bank that, is sort of a mediator between.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought up the specific examples. So again, caveat for someone who's listening. Thomas and I have no idea what we're talking about. So the nickname for the Export Import Bank, we like to call it the street language, is that the Export Import Bank is the Bank of Boeing. That, in case you missed it, is a cut down. That's
Right,
like an insult to Boeing, which we're
right,
supposed to know about. So
right.
the idea here is that Boeing there's a lot of like, is this a monopoly? Is this too big to fail? What's going on here? But Boeing is the main company that builds airplanes, just so that we're all on the same page. And Boeing negotiated a deal with Rolls-Royce, which I believe is in England, so that Rolls-Royce engines are the only engines in Boeing airplanes that are then sold to airliners or potentially military, I guess, but I think mostly commercial or industry-based airlines around the world. And the reason why, depending on if you're in the abolish or accept chapter or articles, whether that is a good thing or a bad thing for the United States. The good side of it, maybe, is this is definitely America first. Um, maybe with the downside that the Rolls Royce engines aren't American. The downside of this is that you have one company negotiating basically international trade agreements uh, for the profit of that one company, which my guess is then shortchanging the free market economy or free trade, not fair trade. That's different. We don't like fair trade. We like free trade because
Right.
the risk is at the business owner level. And the ability to do free trade is what is in the balance. And so the Boeing and Rolls-Royce deal, which is brought up with great agita, is that a company is negotiating something instead of the Export Import Bank that doesn't even have enough board members to meet. They also brought up General Electric and Westinghouse as other individual companies that are doing the work of the Export Import Bank, either in a good way or a bad way, yet to be determined. Um, the charter for said Export Import Bank expires in 2026. Um, that was not. I don't have a Google alert set for that charter expiration date. Did you have a Google alert set?
I started to hyperfixate on the fact that this author's analysis of what GDP is just like wrong.
Mm-hmm. The GDP is
Um,
only based on job growth.
yeah,
And that
and it says on the bottom of page 719, it says here, eloquently cited, not really. It says, while this is a common, okay, so it says, um, so she wants to clarify that there's a misconception about exports. So she says, as trade economists know, exports are a cost to the economy.
Mhm.
Okay. They subtract from GDP, which fails to consider the total equation of what GDP actually is. And it helped me to flush this through ChatGPT, also just looking through different basic equations for what GDP is. And it doesn't make sense just to kind of leave it there, because then she goes on to say, um, something really weird. If the US could acquire all of the imports that it currently gets without exporting anything in exchange, that would be the best of all worlds. Okay, what? I don't, it's frustrating because I don't know what they're arguing. You know? Like what are they, what is she saying about, you know, you review the cost of this export import bank to the United States, how it shouldn't exist, but you fail to provide any reason why it really shouldn't exist other than just like throwing around strange loose arguments about the economy that just don't mesh together at all.
There is a consistent theme of you keep using this word, and I don't think you know what that word means, right? That's one interesting thing. And in this particular case, what I think is fascinating is I in my attempt to be charitable, I'm going to say that a group of people were attempting to write this and got in a rush, so they weren't able to communicate with one another directly on what they were saying,
Yeah.
and then they forgot to do like what I would call like a polish edit
Yeah.
after the shared Google Doc has been asynchronously typed on for a month.
Oh
They
shoot,
just
chapter 23. We have to finish it by next week.
Yeah, they just stapled it together and we're like donezo. Um,
Just don't
I don't
get
know.
it.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I know that kind of threw a wrench into your
No, no, no.
ultimate description of like how this could possibly be.
If if this was a wrench shop, it would have more organization and clearer ideas.
Right.
Oh, throw a wrench. It's fine. Boeing's there. It'll pick it up.
Yeah. Whoa.
Okay. So, when in doubt and or possibly lost, um, I turn to Stop the Coup 2025 for their
Right.
summaries.
Right.
So I'm going to read directly from it because perhaps this is illuminating. And honestly, Thomas, I think it's going to make you and I feel real smart because what the hell's going on? Okay, chapter 23 key points. Anti-bank position. So this is the abolish portion of the Google Doc that got stapled together. 2 points. Number one, eliminate the bank. Tip using the word abolish. If we eliminate the bank, it's a protectionist agency that stymies economic growth. Because remember, we're only focusing on economic growth, but only for the richest business owners. Okay. Number two, conservatives want to lower the federal government's role in economic markets. So then you abolish this, just get it out of there. Okay, the contradictory article that is stapled together that makes the other half of chapter 23 is pro bank, of course. And it has one point. The bank helps the U.S. industries compete in critical markets against foreign companies who are backed by export subsidies, i.e., subsidy combat, leveling the playing field and protecting U.S. interests. Here is I used to teach high school writing critique. All three of those could all be accurate and they wouldn't contradict each other because they are only talking about the same noun, but they're not talking about the same noun in the same way. So that it is not, if we were in high school debate, this would not work because it is still apples and oranging whether or not to abolish or keep the export import bank. And why I think that makes Thomas and I smart is I don't think they get it either.
So
Um,
go over that again. Which part is apples and oranges?
So the abolish, right, is all about economic growth, pro-business, and no government regulations. Get out of it. Boeing has every right to go get a deal with Rolls-Royce and do it
Yeah.
on its own. The thing that pisses off the economic growth or the business free market is that there isn't another company like Boeing, but there could be, and there should be, and if there is or was, if there is or was going to be a solid competitor to Boeing, it should be encouraged to exist and negotiate its own business things to compete with Boeing without any governmental regulation. Right? Like
Right.
that's the
Yeah.
reason to abolish it. The reason to keep it though has nothing to do with that. The reason to keep it is that other countries have a similar dysfunctional thing, and we need to be able to play better at a game of dysfunctional things. And if we get rid of our dysfunctional thing, then we can't play the game with that dysfunction.
Right. And I think in terms
I
of
think.
right, no, and I I believe that that's why the one that says we should keep the bank, that argument seems a bit more fleshed out because for me it's odd that the very first section talks about we need to abolish this bank. And then if you think about the context of why of like the author and why it was published in this oh, I shouldn't say manuscript, that's too generous. This pop culture artifact, right? It's almost it seems like it's anti-capitalist. Like there's a lot of critique on, big tech, big private organizations that steal away from the taxpayers, but they don't the author, she doesn't say that explicitly. She just says that this intermediary, this in-between bank that helps facilitate the sale between borrowing taxpayer dollars and funding these defense contractors is somehow
but
the real problem.
right, but if they get rid of it entirely, then it's the, I'm going to use the word currency, but I don't mean money, but it's the thing that counters China's control of the ocean, control of shipping lanes, and can overall influence or global power because of the, it's only this language that does that. So it's almost like the person who's pro export import bank is very aware that the export import bank has problems, but this problematic thing is the only thing that competes with this huge dynamic
Right.
that currently exists, right? So, if I were, if I may, I'm going to take a second and be a pinko commie liberal yelling at pinko commie liberals. So, language is an excellent example of this. So when myself or people like me, when we begin to like address an involuntary audience about what the linguistic history of a word is, not effective. That is not an effective recruitment tool. But it is also true that it's a really important moment that these words mean something and that you need to know what the words mean so that you don't say things like nonpartisan civil servant loyal to the president's agenda. No, you can't call that
Right.
nonpartisan. Let me explain. Let's start at Latin, right? So my methodology is not ideal. It is not a good recruitment. It's not going to help people change minds. However, I'm going to use an ineffective methodology because otherwise I'm going to light myself on fire. That is a parallel argument as to why to keep the export import bank is broken, but it's all we got to play this other thing. So it comes at risks. The abolishment thing has a better, more consistent argument because it's based on free market, and that is it didn't even have quorum for a year and the world didn't notice,
Right.
and
Right.
we drew the short straw to like figure out duplication, save money and bureaucracy. If it didn't really function for a year and major companies are negotiating their own deals outside of the role of the export import bank, then just get rid of it. I'm
Yeah.
honestly surprised, based on the theme of the mandate for leadership, that they didn't somehow just give it to the Coast Guard, because the Coast Guard is like the big catch-all for everything. But there you go. That's where we're at.
Yeah, and I do agree that it the fact that let me see here, what did I write down? Um
I don't know, but I bet it comes
so
with citations because you're
right,
doing good
no,
role
it
modeling.
was probably the only one that did have a citation in here, is the fact that abolishing, so in the abolish argument, they said that the bank is this um organization that is contradictory toward what it claims to do, because of the fact that they have um, Chinese aerodynamic or airplane investment companies invested into the Exim organization. And so if they're saying, if the organization claims that it's using its power to primarily defend against the financial power of the CCP, it's kind of contradictory because it's receiving funds from aerospace companies in China. So I get that part, and that makes sense. So what doesn't make sense is the original observation that I made about the fact that it's railing on these private companies, but it's the conclusions it's drawing don't make sense. So when I opened up in the beginning on what I immediately had problems with, it was the fact that the author in the pro-abolish argument said that it needs to go because otherwise, just getting my paragraph here that I want to reference, otherwise, where did it go? I thought it was right here.
So close.
I
I
know.
mean,
Well,
ultimately, while you're looking for it, I'm just going to ramble.
yeah,
So,
and I'll let you know when I find
okay,
it.
perfect. But what I think is interesting, if we really go to like kind of a meta level, because at some point we have to get to like, what are we supposed to do about this? And most of my friends, at least, and myself, we're not really in the export import banking level of financial exchange and business development. So this does seem very kind of disconnected from anything I might have any control over at all, whether it were to exist or not to exist. I'm not really aware that my daily life would change much. I could be wrong, but I don't know that I'm that wrong. So why I think that's important is that I think on a normal regular person level, it is interesting to notice some of the language here, that whether we're talking about subsidy combats or asymmetrical warfare toolbox, right? Is
Hmm.
that there there is some oh god, now I'm going to use a sports metaphor. We're on a roll.
Uh-oh.
There's there's some sports analogy organization of a sport I don't understand, right? Like how some people, when you say, "Do you play Quidditch?" that some people that immediately registers like brooms and flying balls, and other people they're like, "I don't know what that word means," right? So if we're talking about a sport that I barely understand, but I have now read 30 pages of poorly written information about Quidditch, then does Quidditch need its own regulation, or is sportsmanship enough of regulation? And people who are very pro Quidditch are going to use the loopholes of Quidditch rules to play the game to their advantage. And so, as a consumer residing within the United States, what those advantages are, I do think that that it's important to at least know that the United States does not play in the most ethical, moral, fair way. And especially in thinking about this external revenue service office that got floated yesterday,
Right.
um, if we are setting up the United States to run like a corporation, I'm not trying to say if that is a good thing or a bad thing, because I also run a business, and I could actually wrap my brain around some ways that that might be considered good. Um, but the external revenue levers are a game I don't typically play. So I need to at least be conscious that there's a game being played that I'm not paying attention to. I feel like
Right.
that's possibly the most charitable. What do I do as a normal person I need to be thinking about? Did you find your thing you were looking for?
Yes,
Go
I
for
said
it.
it was the bottom of page 720, but it was the top. So,
Oh, you're
and
fired.
so, and just on that note too, I think that many people could argue, and I kind of argue that, not kind of, I do argue that the United States does act like a global corporation, and it has done um, since its founding.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when it comes to finding that golden thread with understanding this transnational corporate game and how it impacts us on the individual level, maybe the thing that would be helpful to pay attention to is being mindful of the type of philosophical arguments that are being created in either context of the pro or negative case in this chapter. And so what I mean by that is in the top paragraph of page 720, it talks about how there's this limited condition in which exports promote US economic growth. And then it tells us sort of why that's really hard to attain. And so
Mm-hmm.
it says that uh, this export import bank that we have right now, even though it pales in comparison with the amount of money and funds being circulated compared to like Boeing and other private enterprises, it's saying that having this exist and understanding that we're going to pay into it, it references $14 billion in the next decade, which again pales in comparison with some of the other uh, spending legislation is out there. Um, Again, it makes a good criticism in the fact that, we shouldn't be paying money into something that isn't effective, but it draws a weird conclusion. So it says here that, if we export more than we can import, if we spend too much money that's leaving the country, it's going to, and the author says, the total value of our exports, so it says, this banking organization, Exim, compels American taxpayers to subsidize foreigners' standards of living at no appreciable benefit to the United States. No citation, so broad. It's like it's arguing that if we have this banking organization exist, that we would be paying for someone's air conditioning unit in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't. And so, yeah, so, I agree with the criticisms it draws by what's happening to our money at this really big corporate transnational private enterprise level, but it draws weird conclusions. And I think that is where we can be active with noticing how people argue
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of when people at the bottom level get involved, and if those arguments are flawed, why? And then also, what picture are they, as in the people in government, trying to paint about those who don't have that much power at the bottom, on where we in our consciousness fit into the landscape, into these games? And then
Mm-hmm.
how does that impact how we vote, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So I think paying attention to the philosophical arguments being made between both arguments can help us be smarter when approaching strange banking arguments. So, Fiend, that's my take.
Yeah, no, I think it's smart. And honestly, it's a good place to kind of wrap the conversation about this very strange chapter, because one of the conversations I often have with people with very different politics, right, is that I can hang with someone who wants to reconstrue the education system in the United States. Yeah, it needs help.
Yeah,
Totally agree.
absolutely.
Hanging with you 100%. Um, as someone who used to teach US history, um,
Sorry. Whoa. I
right.
just
Uh, uh, I taught history at Little Rock Central High School, which was completely segregated in 1996. The Little Rock Nine, which were the 9 kids that desegregated Little Rock,
Oh my
the Little
God.
Rock Nine Museum is inside the high school building where I taught that was completely
Yes.
segregated 30 years later. Um, I'm down for like this needs to be changed and overhauled. Sure does, right? When Dodge opened to look at duplication and waste and bureaucracy, sounds amazing.
Right.
When we talk to the Internal Revenue Service and we're talking about simplifying tax code so that normal people can understand it and the IRS doesn't need to be doing audits and investigation because a regular person could do taxes. Sure, sounds wonderful.
Oh.
And then, return tab, new paragraph, Joe Biden is a lizard. And you're like, you had me until
Right.
amphibian,
No, Jess, yes. Oh my God. Oh
right?
yes, exactly.
So
It's the
what you're
yes.
saying is understanding this, but also
Oh
being
my
able to
God.
know when, all right,
Yes.
now I don't agree with you. I did
Oh
agree
my
with
God.
you, but now I cannot move forward agreeing with you where you're at, but I
Yes.
could do it here.
Oh
Go
my
ahead.
God. Yes, that was so perfect because it's that copy and paste, it's the telephone game. It happens. What are the nudges, the psychological nudges or the philosophical nudges that regardless of whatever topic comes up in this project, whatever criticisms that you may agree with or disagree with, if you as the reader are noticing that the author wants to lead you down this really vague path of philosophical reasoning, that exactly what you point out puts you down this path where you're thinking about banking systems and now you're thinking about, oh shoot, I'm paying for someone's meal plan in Belgium. That's where we need to pay attention. And I think that's so good that you pointed out that lizard, comical lizard analogy, metaphor, because it's so true. When we miss the step that it takes to read these conclusions that just don't make sense, even if the criticisms are kind of interesting, that's
Mhm.
where we fail as critical thinkers.
Yeah, because we're just like, whoa, that went too far, so I'm
Yeah.
throwing everything out. Right. But this is not the time to throw things out. This is the time to figure out how to be like, okay, add that math bomb
Right.
too. What? Okay.
I love that reaction. Whoa, wow, you're right. Whoa.
Yeah, I think it's important. All right. Well, Thomas, you were dumb enough to get a second chapter, and I greatly appreciate it. And I appreciate your consistent role modeling of what citations look like. Good job. Um, I I value so much that I decided to do this project, and I have found so much hope inside this project, and I really do hope that that's expounding, right? That like you wading through this and then engaging in this conversation, I think engaging in our community and like staying connected is the greatest act of resistance that we can do. And so I just want to say thank you very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And
Oh,
God knows, if you ever need anything, I owe you 2 yeses. So write that
oh,
down.
awesome. Okay. Yes. My just golden tickets. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Thomas.
Thanks.